Nearly half of people in committed relationships admit that they've had feelings for someone else. 1 in 5 say they've hidden an emotional connection from their partner, and almost everyone believes they'd never cross that line until they do. The truth is, emotional cheating doesn't start in secret. It starts in sincerity. It starts when you share a piece of your heart with someone who makes you feel seen and excited and alive. Someone who understands you a little too well. You don't plan it. You just find yourself thinking about them, replaying the conversations, checking your phone more often. Feels harmless, even healthy, but the non-conscious mind doesn't see it that way. To your non-conscious, emotional connection is intimacy. Today, I want to unpack the neuroscience behind emotional affairs, how meaning drives attachment, why boundaries matter to the brain, and how awareness can protect love from quietly splitting in two. Because the real question isn't who you touch, it's who your conscious mind turns towards when it needs to feel seen, and why. Intimacy builds a network of the other person into your mind, brain, and body, and runs on the same overlapping neurochemistry as romance, dopamine for anticipation, oxytocin for closeness, adrenaline for secrecy. This means that the same chemical loop that is activated and drives desire in an affair is triggered by emotional attachment long before anything physical ever even happens. And that's why when emotional affairs come to light, they hit harder than most people expect. The betrayed partner can't understand why it hurts so much. The person who formed the bond can't explain why it felt so real. It is because their brains weren't imagining it. They were literally obeying the network with its meaning that the conscious mind, against the wise advice from the depths of the instinct, had wired into the brain and body. A 2024 meta-analysis on emotional infidelity found that over 70% of people consider an emotional connection outside their relationship to be as serious or more painful than a physical one. And yet, most of us still minimize it. We tell ourselves, it's just talking, just venting, just connection, but the brain doesn't label it that way. It simply follows the classification. We live in an age where emotional availability is currency, where attention feels more intimate than touch. Every direct message, every late night conversation, every you get me moment can start building a bond your brain interprets as intimacy because your conscious mind has called it safety. And that's why modern infidelity looks different. It's not just about bodies anymore, it's about bandwidth. What makes this conversation uncomfortable is chemistry, not morality. Because when your conscious mind assigns new emotional meaning to someone, your brain responds with loyalty. Because it's a messenger of the mind. It's translating. It shifts dopamine towards that source, reinforcing the pattern through repetition. You begin craving their response the way someone might crave validation or even a high. And the deeper the emotions loop between the conscious mind and the brain, the more loyalty actually shifts, silently, neurologically, before anyone even notices. So what counts as cheating? When the conscious mind can assign romantic meaning through a screen, when messages replace memories, when they just understand me better, start sounding like an excuse instead of an explanation. We need to tune into the wise, non-conscious part of our minds to guide us. And that's where we begin. Every week, I unpack the hidden secret of thought, emotion, and connection so you can understand yourself and others with more depth. We don't avoid hard conversations here. We explore them through neuroscience, philosophy, and lived human experience. Because the more you understand what your brain is doing, the more freedom you have to guide it. So, if you're curious about love, loyalty, and awareness, how they really interact inside the mind, stay with me. We are just getting started. Now let's get into today's episode. Good. Emotional affairs don't start with a plan. They start with permission. The kind you give yourself when you say, we are just close, or it's not a big deal. You convince yourself that honesty with someone else doesn't take anything away from your partner. But slowly it actually does. Because what feels like openness can potentially become escape if not managed. At first it's light. Conversations about work, stress, everyday life. But those talks start lasting longer, and you find yourself sharing more, laughing more freely, saying things you used to say for the person you promised to share your life with. And that's when something subtle happens. Unless you check in with your non-conscious mind, which is telling you to be careful in that small, still voice, your emotions begin migrating. Your conscious mind starts assigning meaning to this new connection, and it feels safe, refreshing, easy. And because your conscious mind labels it as comfort, your brain follows with chemistry because your brain is the messenger of the mind. Dopamine, along with biochemical changes. Fire, when you see their name pop up. Oxytocin releases when they listen closely. Your heart rate picks up in anticipation. None of this is bad or immoral. It's biology obeying the meaning that the conscious mind is creating. But over time, that network with its chemistry and structure builds into a habit, and you start craving the emotional safety of someone who isn't your partner. This is the emotional landscape of modern infidelity. Not scandal, but substitution. It's the quiet trade between attention and attachment. You might even notice a shift inside of yourself. The excitement that used to come from your partner feels a bit dulled, replaced by curiosity elsewhere. The conversations that once happened at home start happening through messages. And when you think about your partner, you start comparing, noticing what's missing, interpreting neutrality as neglect. The brain follows the focus, and focus creates feeling. When people describe emotional affairs, they often talk about how it feels like falling, but what's actually happening is neurological rewiring by the conscious mind reacting instead of being curious. The conscious mind falls into the trap of assigning meaning without consultation. This person makes me feel alive, understood, valued, and the brain locks that association in place. Each repeated thought strengthens the connection until anticipation becomes attachment. What we call chemistry is simply the body expressing meaning because the brain and body are simply messengers of the mind. They're translating the thought. The hardest part to face is that it doesn't feel wrong because in the process, the quiet warning from the non-conscious voice was ignored. In fact, it can almost feel like clarity. Emotional closeness outside of your relationship can temporarily relieve loneliness. It becomes a mirror for the parts of you that have been ignored. You start thinking, I just need someone to talk to. But conversation is never neutral when it meets an unmet need. Once emotional energy is redirected, the brain adjusts. Your trust becomes routed somewhere else. This is why emotional affairs are often so confusing. They look like friendship but feel like freedom. The conscious mind justifies them as a connection, while the brain and the body express them as intimacy. The contradiction creates cognitive dissonance, a psychological tug-of-war between what you value, guided by your non-conscious mind, and what you crave, led by your conscious mind. One side says, I'm not doing anything wrong. The other side quietly asks, then why do I feel so divided? That's where the guilt begins. Not from the act itself, but from the awareness that meaning has shifted. Each interaction deepens the bond, even if the intent was innocent. It is repetition, not intention, that shapes the attachment. And over time, this emotional split can start reshaping identity. You may begin protecting this connection, not because of what it is, but because of what it represents. It becomes a safe corner of your life where you can feel emotionally seen without accountability. But that safety is fragile because it's built on secrecy, and secrecy is a stressor. Cortisol rises, focus narrows, the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning center, struggles to keep up with the emotional high-low cycle, tug-of-war between the conscious and the non-conscious mind. So what feels exciting starts to feel consuming. Eventually, the same chemistry that made the bond feel alive starts turning against you. When messages slow down or responses change, you feel withdrawal. The same dopamine that lifted you now leaves you restless. The same anticipation that felt romantic becomes anxiety. It's not love disappearing, it's reward prediction error. Your brain reacting to a break in expected feedback. A kind of chemical disappointment that mirrors loss. That's why ending an emotional affair often feels like grief. Because it is. You are not just letting go of a person, you're letting go of the version of yourself that existed in that emotional space. The brain doesn't separate loss by moral category. It just registers absence as an unfed network, which is why betrayal hurts so deeply. Because it is in your mind and is a physical network and your physical brain and body. Which is why betrayal hurts so deeply, because it is in your mind and is a physical network in your brain and body. The brain and body experience the collapse of meaning. If you have ever been through something like this on either side, you know how disorientating it can feel. And you question everything, the boundaries of friendship, the definition of intimacy, even your capacity for honesty. But the truth is, this isn't about being weak or unfaithful. It is about being human in an era that constantly blurs emotional boundaries. Awareness isn't about shame. It is about ownership. Realizing that emotional connection has power, that meaning always directs chemistry, and that loyalty starts in the mind long before it ever shows up in behavior. So, before we talk about the science, take a moment to recognize what's really happening here. Emotional affairs are not proof of moral failure. They are proof of meaning misplaced. And once you understand that, you can start to change it. And we will look at what the brain is actually doing next, how these patterns of attachment form, why they feel so addictive, even when they start with something so simple as a conversation. When emotional intimacy deepens, the brain isn't making moral judgments, it is running code. The conscious mind assigns meaning and wires it into physical networks with chemistry in the brain. The body expresses it through feeling. Every attachment begins as a pattern of attention, repeated often enough to become established biology that drives us. At the center of emotional attachment are complex biochemical responses, which can be simplified into the dopamine reward pathway and the oxytocin bonding network. And one of the effects of dopamine release is to motivate you to seek connection, to pursue the person or experience that gives your mind a sense of significance. Oxytocin flow tends to stabilize that connection, and it's released through trust, shared vulnerability, and mutual attention. And together, they form what I call the bonding blueprint, because they flow through the actual protein network of neurons that the details of the relationship are wired into. This, in essence, creates a feedback loop that converts emotional meaning into physiological loyalty. The neural network acts as an antenna, so each time you think of the person, this sends more energy to the network and more chemicals are released. When you confide in someone, your mind labels that moment as safe, and the brain obeys. It floods your system with neurochemicals that reinforce a sense of security. The more you share, the stronger the loop becomes. And this is how emotional attachment takes shape, not through grand gestures, but through consistent repetition of attention. The conscious mind-brain loop learns to associate the presence of that person with comfort and reward. And then over time, this loop starts anticipating the interaction before it even happens. That anticipation is a lot of psychoneurobiology of pursuit at work. The reason you feel a small rush when you see their name appear on your screen, it's not a desire in the romantic sense yet. It is the conscious mind-brain loop marking importance. And because it activates a rush of dopamine, it primes you to seek the stimulus again. And the more the mind labels it as meaningful, the more the brain reinforces the pattern. This is where it becomes complicated. The prefrontal cortex, the region activated by reasoning and long-term perspective, begins to relax during emotional excitement. Okay, real talk. Midweek, my brain has already done a lot. And the last thing I want to do is stand in the kitchen at 6 p.m. trying to figure out what to make for dinner. For a while, I was stuck in the same loop. And honestly, even my favorite pasta with fresh basil pesto and juicy chicken can only carry you so far before you start craving something new. And that's where HelloFresh came in for me. Because I care deeply about what goes into my body, real, wholesome ingredients that actually nourish you, and HelloFresh delivers exactly that. And they make it exciting. They have bold flavors from around the world, Vietnamese, Moroccan, Caribbean, with everything pre-portioned and sent straight to your door. No recipe rabbit holes, no mystery ingredients, all measured out, all good quality. Over 80 global recipes every month. So you're always eating well and eating interestingly. And at the end of the full day, nothing hits home like home cooking. I use HelloFresh, and honestly, you should too. Go to hellofresh.com/drleaf10fm to get 10 free meals plus a free NutriBullet Ultra Plus 2-in-1 compact kitchen system at $189.99 value on your third box. Free meals applied as a discount on your first box. New subscribers only, varies by plan. Must order third box by May 31st, 2026. When I started this podcast, I had a lot of what ifs running through my mind, and not the good kind. What if no one listens? What if it doesn't connect? And that kind of toxic thinking can really paralyze even the most purpose-driven person. Now, enter Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses worldwide and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. So whether you're just getting started or ready to scale, Shopify has everything in one place. Inventory, payments, analytics, email, and social campaigns. There's no juggling of a dozen platforms, which is really great. Their AI tools even help you write product descriptions and polish your photography. And if you ever get stuck, their award-winning 24/7 support has got your back. So I chose to detox those thoughts and take the leap anyway, and it's been one of the best decisions of my life. Having a partner like Shopify made that a whole lot easier. Plus, Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. That iconic shop pay button that turns browsers into buyers. So it's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/leaf. Go to shopify.com/leaf. That's shopify.com/leaf. Studies in biological psychology 2021 show that people experiencing deep emotional intimacy outside their primary relationship demonstrate reduced activation in self-regulatory circuits. In simple terms, the conscious mind has stopped listening to the non-conscious mind and is focusing on the immediate sense of satisfaction as opposed to evaluating consequences. At the same time, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center, can become hypersensitive to perceived rejection. A delayed message, a different tone, or a shorter reply can trigger a toxic stress response. Cortisol rises, and the attachment that once felt like comfort begins to feel like craving. You start checking your phone not for curiosity but for relief. And that's how an emotional bond shifts from connection to compulsion. The neuroscience term for this is anticipatory reward conditioning. It means the conscious mind-brain loop activates the release of dopamine, not when pleasure occurs, but when it expects it. The message doesn't even have to arrive. The mere thought of it is enough to create a chemical surge. This is why emotional affairs can feel so addictive. The brain learns to crave the anticipation itself. And because oxytocin is also released through consistent emotional sharing, that craving becomes attached to trust. The more personal the conversations, the more oxytocin binds that experience to safety. And then over time, you don't just want the person's attention, your body starts relying on it to maintain balance. However, this balance never arrives because it's getting mixed signals from the conscious mind not listening to the cautionary advice from the non-conscious mind. When this pattern is sustained, the brain begins to reorganize priority pathways and confusion ensues. The reward centers give more weight to the new connection and less to the existing partner. And this isn't conscious betrayal, it's neurochemical loyalty shifting through repetition. Meaning directs focus, focus directs rewiring and chemistry. And this psychoneurobiology shows up in our emotions, behaviors, and body and our perspectives. Here's where the distinction between mind and brain becomes really critical. The mind writes the story, the brain performs it. Your mind says, this connection matters, and your brain produces the emotional soundtrack to match. If your mind keeps replaying that story, the brain assumes it's true. Brain doesn't think. It doesn't know whether something is right or wrong, only whether it's repeated. And there's another layer. The mind has different levels. The conscious mind thinks, feels, and chooses. The non-conscious mind guides this process with insightful reasoning, logic, and wisdom. If the conscious mind acts alone, we will make bad choices. If the conscious mind listens to the non-conscious mind, it will make good choices. When there is a break between these two levels of the mind, emotional affairs can feel involuntary. You tell yourself to stop thinking about them, but the conscious mind has already built a pattern into the brain. And the more you resist the non-conscious, means you won't reframe the meaning. Then the stronger the association becomes. Avoidance strengthens the loop because the attention itself, even in denial, still tells the brain that this person matters. From a neuroscience perspective, That's how attachments will deepen, through attention, anticipation, and repetition from the conscious mind. The same mechanisms that sustain long-term love sustain emotional affairs, with one huge difference. Long-term love always involves a partnership between the non-conscious mind and conscious mind. The difference is not in chemistry, but in context. One is supported by shared meaning, the other is sustained by secrecy. Secrecy, however, carries its own biological weight. The stress of hiding something activates the body's threat system. Cortisol rises, heart rate increases, and the hippocampus, the memory center, begins to record that person as both reward and risk. Dual coding is what makes emotional affairs feel exhilarating and exhausting at the same time. The brain is navigating two conflicting stories. This is safe and this is dangerous. And when those two stories compete, emotional regulation becomes unstable. The limbic system, where emotional memory lives, begins to dominate decision making. The logical mind won't regain control until the conscious mind chooses to let it, because the conscious mind keeps instructing chemistry to reinforce meaning. You can feel the contradiction physically in your body, the excitement of connection paired with the anxiety of concealment. And in this sense, the emotional fear becomes less about romance and more about regulation. The conscious mind-brain loop starts using the other person as a way to stabilize mood. Each interaction offers a small dopamine release that temporarily lowers cortisol, and it feels like peace, but it's just a momentary recalibration in the wrong direction. When that person isn't available, the chemistry drops, and the stress response returns. It is a psychoneurobiological pendulum, calm spike crash. This loop mirrors what the researchers call behavioral reinforcement cycles, similar to those observed in reward-based habits. But the solution isn't suppression, it's redirection, because the mind can always update meaning. Once awareness enters, the brain's loyalty can be retrained. The same networks that sustain secrecy can strengthen transparency once the conscious mind changes the narrative. And that is why awareness is the first step towards fidelity, not moral correction. When you realize your brain is only obeying the story your conscious mind keeps rehearsing, you gain power. You can decide to write a new one. So before we move into the myths that shape how we think about loyalty, remember this: brain and body networks and chemistry aren't the villain. They are the messenger, the translator. They tell you what meaning your mind has been practicing. And once you understand that, you can begin to change the message itself. We live in a culture that treats emotional availability like a virtue. We celebrate connection, openness, and vulnerability, often without context or boundaries. But not every connection is healthy. Not every conversation is harmless. The brain doesn't evaluate intent because the brain is just a filter and a messenger. Whatever we repeat becomes psychoneurobiology. And we have been trained by culture to repeat emotional intimacy with too many people too often without realizing what it's doing to our sense of loyalty. One of the biggest myths around emotional affairs is that it's not cheating if it's not physical. That phrase has been used so often it sounds like logic, but it's not. It's not neuroscience. The mind defines intimacy through meaning, not through anatomy. When you consistently direct your emotional energy towards someone other than your partner, your brain encodes that connection as the priority connection. The body just follows the story. In reality, the opposite happens. When you offload emotional intimacy outside your partnership, you are rerouting trust. The very network that should be reinforcing closeness begins strengthening a different type of bond. What you think is relieving stress is actually redistributing it. You might feel lighter temporarily, but the relationship feels the depletion. A third myth is that emotional boundaries are old-fashioned. Modern culture confuses openness with honesty, as if sharing everything with everyone is a sign of authenticity. But the brain simply reflects the fragmentation that the conscious mind creates. On a very simplistic level, and as an example, each emotional bond you form releases a small amount of oxytocin, a neurochemical signal that says, this person matters. When too many of those conscious mind signals fire without collaboration with the non-conscious mind, that provides the correct meaning and structure, emotional coherence breaks down. You end up feeling overstimulated, spread thin, and quietly disconnected from the people who actually know you the best. So we live in a world that rewards attention more than connection. The more we share, the more our interactions are rewarded. Likes, comments, and conversations create microbursts of dopamine that reinforce the illusion of closeness. And over time, and by vetoing collaboration with the non-conscious mind, the conscious mind quite literally gets sucked into confusing emotional access with intimacy. We think visibility equals connection, but the brain measures trust, not views. A comment section can't regulate your nervous system. A deep conversation without accountability can't replace commitment. Another common myth says that emotional connection with someone else happens because something is missing in your current relationship. But neuroscience shows that attachment often forms from novelty, not deficiency. The brain's reward system releases dopamine when it encounters newness, new feedback, new validation, new energy. That high can feel like discovery, but it's really just chemical curiosity. The conscious mind interprets novelty as significance, and the brain obeys. Without self-regulation that the non-conscious provides, this obedience means distorted wiring in the brain. And that's why emotional affairs happen in stable relationships too. They are not always about what's broken, they are about what's repeated. So when your conscious mind gives more attention to novelty than to familiarity, your brain starts coding excitement as importance. The comfort of home feels quiet compared to the rush of new emotional resonance. Culture calls that chemistry. Science calls it habituation and reward bias because of a breakdown in the necessary collaboration between the non-conscious and conscious mind. We have also normalized the idea that emotional affairs are harmless because nothing happened. But something always happens when meaning moves. The other person and the meaning you attach to them gets wired into your mind, brain, and body network. When your thoughts and emotions attach to someone outside your commitment, energy does shift. The conscious mind begins creating two parallel realities, the one you are living and the one you are imagining. The brain maintains both, and the body carries the tension. We use romantic vocabulary to describe platonic situations and wonder why the boundaries blur. The brain takes language literally. Every word you use becomes a cue for chemistry. When you tell yourself someone gets you, the brain releases the same bonding signals it would during an emotional intimacy with a partner. Words matter because meaning matters. Here is another subtle myth, that emotional honesty with someone else is safer than physical temptation. Many people rationalize deep emotional sharing as maturity, but when that sharing is exclusive, it creates emotional infidelity disguised as friendship. You end up loyal to the person who listens most, not necessarily the person who loves most. This is where the cultural contradiction becomes really clear. We crave belonging, but celebrate independence. We are told to find our person, but also to keep every option emotionally open. And that tension teaches the mind to divide attention, to value novelty over depth, self-expression over self-awareness. Let's talk about sleep for a second. Because if you are watching this and you're not sleeping well, everything else suffers. Your focus, your mood, your ability to manage stress. It really starts with rest. I finally upgraded to a Brooklyn bedding mattress, and I am not exaggerating when I say it's been such a game changer. The first thing that I noticed was how solid it felt, but not stiff, but sturdy, like it was built to actually last. And then there's this perfect balance that I love. Enough support to keep your spine lined, but also soft enough that you're not lying on a board all night. Here's what makes Brooklyn bedding very different. They design and assemble every mattress in their own Arizona factory. So there's no middleman marking up the price, just honest craftsmanship and quality materials. They are endorsed by the American Chiropractic Association. They are 100% fiberglass free, and if you tend to sleep hot, they use cooling technology like Glaciotex covers and copper-infused foams to regulate your temperature all night. Fabulous. And they give you 120 nights to try it. If it doesn't work for you, they'll help you return or swap it, completely hassle-free. So if you are ready to actually wake up feeling rested, go to brooklynbedding.com and use my promo code Dr. Leaf at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. That's brooklynbedding.com, promo code Dr. Leaf with 30% off. Support the show and let them know that we sent you. brooklynbedding.com, promo code Dr. Leaf. Okay, I have to be honest with you. I have tried so many things in the wellness space. And when GLP-1 started trending everywhere, I was curious. But injecting myself with something every week just didn't sit right with me. I wanted something that actually worked and that I felt good putting into my body. That's why I was so excited to find Veracity. Veracity is an all-natural, drug-free, clinically proven way to support your metabolism, which is really the root cause of so many health struggles. And their hero product, Metabolism Ignite, is the #1 doctor-recommended GLP-1 booster and alternative. We are talking an 85% reduction in hunger, clinically proven to help you lose an average of 9 pounds in 90 days. No side effects, no allergens, and 100% plant-based. I've been taking it, just 2 capsules with breakfast, and I feel genuinely energized and focused all day. And it was founded by a certified hormonal health coach who developed it from her own experiences with metabolic issues. I use Veracity and I think you should too. So before Metabolism Ignite sells out again, make the switch to GLP-1s the natural way. Head to veracityhealth.co and use the code Dr. Leaf for up to 65% off your order. So once again, that is VERACITY health.co for up to 65% off. And make sure you use my promo code Dr. Leaf so they know I sent you. And it is why modern relationships can feel both hyper-connected and profoundly lonely. The psychoneurobiology of attention is spread too thin to sustain loyalty. All these myths have one thing in common. They confuse availability with intimacy. True intimacy is focus, the consistent chosen direction of emotional energy. It's not about sharing everything, it's about choosing where meaning goes. When the meaning scatters, the brain scatters with it, and confusion follows. In my terms, this isn't about control or suppression, it's about directed awareness and self-regulation. You can't control every feeling, but you can manage that meaning you give to it. The collaborative mind has authority over attention. When you decide what connection represents safety, the brain aligns its chemistry to follow. That's the real antidote to cultural myths. Awareness and self-regulation. Not fear and not guilt. Once you see that meaning is the foundation of fidelity, you stop asking, is this cheating? And start asking, what story is my mind telling? Love falters when meaning drifts. Attention follows curiosity, and curiosity without boundaries, which comes from a lack of collaboration between the conscious and unconscious mind, will become networks and chemistry without context. The mind writes the story and the brain believes it. Next, we'll talk about how to rewrite that story, how to create what I call intimacy integrity, the alignment between thought, focus, and emotional energy that keeps love anchored in awareness. Now it's time to reconceptualize what fidelity really means. Because fidelity isn't just about behavior, it's about focusing. It's about where your conscious mind returns when it needs safety, validation, or excitement. Emotional loyalty begins in attention long before it's ever visible in action. For years, we've been taught to define faithfulness as what we don't do. But neuroscience shows that the real commitment is about what we practice. The brain follows whatever the mind rehearses. If you repeatedly invest emotional energy outside your relationship, your networks and chemistry will eventually follow your focus because of neuroplasticity. But if you consciously bring attention back, not through guilt but through awareness and self-regulation, that same neuroplasticity can rebuild it at home. The reconceptualization starts with one powerful realization. Meaning is magnetic. Wherever the conscious mind assigns significance, the brain builds pathways to sustain it. That's why shifting loyalty isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about redirecting meaning. When you consciously choose where your attention goes, you teach the brain what to prioritize. Think of it like a search engine that auto-completes based on your history. Each time you give emotional energy to someone, you are adding to that search history. The next time you feel vulnerable, the brain suggests the same person or the same type of interaction because that's what the mind has told it what matters. The only way to change that is to consciously update the data, to start inputting new emotional experiences aligned with your chosen commitment. And that is why I call this process intimacy integrity. It's the collaboration between the unconscious and the conscious that shows up in the alignment between thought, focus, and emotional energy. It's not about control, it's about coherence. It's about the state of being emotionally consistent across your words, attention, and actions. When your mind, brain, and body are unified under the same meaning, fidelity in this way changes the emotional equation. It stops being a battle of temptation and becomes a practice of intention. Instead of asking, how do I avoid connecting with someone else? You begin asking, where do I want my emotional energy to grow? This small linguistic shift turns protection into creation. And the neuroscience supports this too. The prefrontal cortex, the center of the brain that responds when we reason, strengthens its regulatory control when we consciously refocus attention. Each time you choose awareness over automaticity, you activate the same circuits responsible for emotional stability and long-term decision making. Awareness and self-regulation don't just stop harmful patterns, they rebuild protective ones. In relationships, that awareness and self-regulation looks like small, consistent choices. Reaching out to your partner when you feel disconnected instead of someone new. Communicating discomfort before it becomes resentment. Noticing when comparison starts and redirecting that energy towards gratitude. These micro decisions signal to the brain, this is where safety lives. And that's where psychoneurobiology starts to change. The moment the conscious mind reassigns meaning, the brain begins to update its networks and chemistry. Neural networks deconstruct and reconstruct. Dopamine recalibrates towards the chosen bond. Oxytocin increases through renewed trust and vulnerability. Cortisol drops as secrecy dissolves. It's not magic, it's mind management. The biology follows belief. It is important to understand that this reconceptualization isn't about shame. You can't force loyalty through fear, but you can rebuild it through meaning. When you understand how emotional bonds form, you can choose how they evolve. And one of the most liberating parts of this reconceptualization is realizing that attraction isn't the enemy, meaning is. Emotional interest in others will always happen. It's part of being human. What matters is what you do with that awareness. When you acknowledge it consciously, the brain relaxes. When you suppress it, the brain intensifies it. Awareness paired with self-regulation neutralizes emotional energy because it keeps control in the collaborative mind's domain. If we redefine fidelity through the lens of mind management, it becomes dynamic, not defensive. It is about creating emotional focus instead of policing emotional impulses. The brain isn't wired for moral perfection, it's wired for adaptation. And that means loyalty is a learned behavior, sustained through repetition of attention. Every time you redirect your focus towards what you value most, you reinforce that neural network. This reconceptualization also demands honesty about needs. Many emotional fears begin as attempts to fill unmet emotional spaces. The desire to be seen, understood, or just simply desired. Those needs aren't shameful. They are signals from the non-conscious mind saying something here needs attention. But if you outsource that attention to someone else, you delay your own growth. Awareness plus self-regulation allows you to address the need instead of escape it. Reconceptualizing fidelity this way transforms relationships because it replaces secrecy with curiosity. Instead of hiding feelings, you can explore them. Instead of fearing desire, you can analyze what it represents. Often, the desire for emotional novelty isn't about another person at all. It is about wanting to feel alive within yourself again. Understanding this allows you to choose access to the wisdom of your non-conscious mind. Turn your focus inward rather than seeking external solutions. I have seen this happen with people who learn to use this awareness and self-regulation as their first response instead of justification. They start noticing early signs, the text that feels a little too important, the thought that lingers too long, the comparison that starts to sting. And instead of indulging or denying it, they pause. They name it. They decide what it means before their brain turns it into chemistry. That pause is power. The mind is always assigning meaning. That's what it does. The question is whether you are doing it with the conscious mind alone or in collaboration with the non-conscious mind. Emotional loyalty is not passive. It is practiced. Every time you bring focus back to what you value, you are building neural fidelity. Every moment of awareness and self-regulation is a quiet declaration. I decide where my attention belongs. That's what intimacy integrity really is. Not the absence of temptation, but the presence of awareness and self-regulation. It's living with your attention aligned to your values, your meaning clear, and your chemistry stable. That's what makes relationships sustainable, not because they are perfect, but because they are intentional. So as we move into the next part, I want to turn this reconceptualization into practice, because awareness without application is just information. Let's talk about how to make this real, how to use a step-by-step tool to bring your mind back into alignment whenever you feel emotional energy drifting elsewhere. Awareness and self-regulation only matter if it turns into action. That's what makes transformation real. It's not just knowing what's happening in your mind and brain, it's catching yourself in the moment and choosing something different before the established conscious mind-brain loop takes over. I want to walk you through a 5-step process that helps me do that. I call it the Neurocycle prescription for emotional integrity practice. It's not a rule or a routine. It is a way of bringing your conscious mind back in alignment with your non-conscious mind whenever your emotional energy starts drifting somewhere else and somewhere it shouldn't. Each step reminds your brain who's leading, because the mind should always lead and the brain should always follow. Let's walk through it together. The first thing I do is gather awareness. I notice what's happening without judgment. Maybe I catch myself thinking about a conversation that made me feel validated or understood. Maybe I notice a name or message that gives me that small dopamine rush. I don't shame it. I just see it. I ask myself, what story am I rehearsing right now? Because every emotional loop starts as a thought loop. The moment you name it, your prefrontal cortex, the reasoning part of your brain, switches on. That's the turning point. You are no longer inside the emotion, you are watching it. The chemistry begins to calm and the networks start to reconstruct because the mind has stepped back into leadership. Then comes step 2, reflection. I ask, what need is this connection trying to meet? Every emotional pull is a signal. Sometimes it's a need for affirmation or for being heard or for feeling seen. Reflection doesn't mean shaming the need, it means understanding it. The moment you realize the feeling isn't random, you stop being controlled by it. The collaboration between the conscious and the non-conscious mind begins tracing the signal back to its source instead of chasing the person who triggered it. That's huge. And that's metacognition. Thinking about your thinking. It's one of the mind's greatest gifts, it's our superpower. When you engage it, the emotional intensity lowers. You are rewiring your brain with your mind. That safety isn't found in avoidance, it is found in awareness and self-regulation. Then, once I've reflected, I go to step 3, which is write. I write something down. Sometimes it's a note on my phone, sometimes it's a few words on paper. Writing externalizes the thought with its memories and attached emotions, and it starts deconstructing and reconstructing the thought driving the infidelity. I might write something like, I feel drawn to this person because they listen without judgment. The moment those words exist on paper and you see them, you have unlocked the energy that helped keep you stuck inside of them and they lose power. I can see them clearly. This is what I call the multiple perspective advantage, the space between experience and evaluation. When the thought with its details and emotion become language, it becomes something you can manage. Then I go to step 4, called the recheck. I ask myself, is this the only possible meaning? Maybe what I've been calling connection is actually an unmet need for reassurance. Maybe what feels like friendship is quiet escapism. I challenge my story with compassion, because the brain will keep reinforcing whatever meaning the mind repeats. And rechecking gives you the chance to change the narrative before it becomes chemical truth. And when meaning changes, reconstructing networks and chemistry will follow. Dopamine stabilizes, oxytocin resets, the emotional high fades into calm focus. Not because you suppressed it, but because you redefined it. That's what neuroplasticity really is, the mind updating the brain through new meaning. Finally, I take an active reach, step 5. And that means I act on the new story. Maybe I share what I'm feeling with my partner. Maybe I set a boundary for myself. Maybe I turn that same emotional energy into gratitude. Whatever it is, I do something concrete that reinforces the meaning I've chosen. Action is how the conscious mind serves the new pattern into the non-conscious mind and brain and body. It's what tells the brain, this is real. Keep this one. Each time you act on awareness and self-regulation, the chemistry shifts, serotonin steadies, dopamine balances, and cortisol drops. You are teaching your brain that stability feels better than secrecy. Now let's all this together into real life. Imagine that you notice yourself thinking a lot about a coworker. Instead of panicking, you pause. You gather awareness. I'm thinking about this person because our conversations make me feel valued. Then you reflect. What need is that meeting? Maybe it's appreciation. You write it down. Could I meet that need another way? Maybe by communicating more openly with your partner or expressing appreciation at home. Finally, you take an active reach. You send your partner a text saying something kind. You've just redirected meaning, and because the mind led, the brain followed. This is not about avoiding. It is about mastering attention. The more you practice it, the sooner you will catch the thought with its emotional drift before it becomes attachment. You will start recognizing early cues, the thought that lingers too long, the comparison that feels unfair, the moment of validation that feels a little too comforting. You see, awareness gives you choice, and choice rewrites chemistry and brain structure. Over time, this practice becomes automatized into a habit. Your brain learns that emotional consistency equals safety. Cortisol drops, the limbic system relaxes, and the prefrontal cortex strengthens its regulation. You start to feel steady, not because life is perfect, but because meaning has matured. Every time you walk through these steps, you are teaching your brain a new definition of loyalty, focused awareness, and self-regulation. You are showing it that fidelity doesn't mean avoidance, it means alignment. And when awareness and self-regulation aligns with values, peace replaces guilt. This is the power of the mind, to direct chemistry instead of being directed by it. So as we move forward, I want to show you what this looks like when people actually live it. When awareness and self-regulation doesn't just stay theoretical, but transforms real relationships, real trust, and real connection. When we talk about emotional affairs, it's easy to think of them as abstract ideas, but they are not. They live in real moments, real relationships, and real people who never thought it would happen to them. These stories aren't about judgment, they are about awareness. They show how our meaning changes quietly and how awareness and self-regulation can change it back. I once spoke with a woman who said, I never planned to get emotionally involved. I just wanted someone to listen. She described how it began with empathy, a co-worker who noticed when she looked tired, who asked questions, who remembered small details. She said it felt so refreshing, like being seen again. But over time, she started waiting for his messages. She checked the phone in meetings, felt a rush when he replied, and noticed disappointment when he didn't. When she finally paused to reflect, she realized something powerful. Her focus. Her conscious mind had been feeding meaning into a connection that now felt vital. Once she acknowledged that, she was able to step back. She redirected that same emotional honesty towards her partner, not in accusation, but in truth. And the result wasn't just reconnection, it was clarity. She said, I don't need someone new to listen. I needed to start speaking again where it mattered. And that is what awareness and self-regulation does. It doesn't erase what happened, it rewrites the story. The brain follows new meaning as faithfully as it followed the old. I actually heard a similar story from a man who thought emotional affairs were something other people dealt with. He said, I used to think as long as nothing physical happened, it didn't count. But he found himself confiding in a close friend at work. It started with jokes and long conversations, then sharing frustrations about home. Eventually he realized he was guarding that relationship more than his marriage. I would delete messages that weren't even inappropriate, he said, just because they felt too personal. When he learned how emotional bonding works in the mind-brain-body connection, everything clicked. He said, it wasn't about her, it was about the chemical high of being understood. That insight changed everything. Instead of shaming himself, he began redirecting that energy. He used the same emotional integrity practice we just discussed to identify what he needed: affirmation, novelty, acknowledgement, and to start meeting those needs consciously with his partner. Over time, the craving faded, and what replaced it was peace. My loyalty didn't come back through guilt, he said, it came back through meaning. These stories remind us that emotional affairs don't always look like betrayal. Sometimes they look like people trying to feel alive again. The brain isn't addicted to people, it is addicted to balance and meaning because it's wired for love. When you understand that, compassion replaces judgment. I also think of a couple I worked with who went through this together. After the husband formed a deep emotional bond with someone else, his wife said what hurt most wasn't the connection, it was the secrecy. I didn't feel like I lost him. She said, I felt like I'd stopped existing in the part of his life that mattered most. When they both learned how the brain bonds through repeated emotional investment, something shifted. Instead of focusing on blame, they focused on rebuilding focus, using awareness and self-regulation to teach their chemistry what loyalty feels like again. They began small, sharing daily reflections instead of scrolling in silence, practicing active gratitude instead of silent resentment. Within weeks, both described feeling a new kind of connection, one based not on control, but on conscious presence. Their marriage didn't go back to what it was. It evolved into something more intentional. The wife told me, I used to think rebuilding trust meant starting over, but now I know it just means paying attention on purpose. Every time I hear stories like these, I'm reminded of something neuroscience shows us so clearly. Awareness and self-regulation don't erase chemistry, they redirect it. The mind's job is to assign meaning, and the brain's job is to obey. That's true whether the story you are living is betrayal or renewal. You can always give your brain new instructions. This is also a mirror for our culture. We live in a world that encourages constant connection but rarely teaches emotional boundaries. Every notification, every new conversation, every social media interaction trains our minds to associate novelty with value. But novelty without purpose breeds emotional fatigue. The more emotionally accessible we become to everyone, the harder it is to stay deeply connected to anyone. And that is why emotional awareness and self-regulation isn't just personal work, it's a cultural repair. Every time you pause before oversharing, every time you turn your attention back toward your partner, you are not just protecting your relationship, you are modeling emotional discipline for a world that desperately needs it. You are showing what mindful connection looks like. I have seen workplaces transform when people understood this. Teams stopped confusing constant communication with genuine connection. Friends started realizing that attention isn't intimacy, even online. I've seen people begin to post differently, not from loneliness, but from awareness. The more people understand that emotional energy from our thoughts creates real physical and chemical consequences in the brain and body, the more intentional our connections will become. That is the cultural mirror of emotional affairs. They reveal how easily our biology adapts to whatever story we feed it. They show us how vulnerable we are to misplaced meaning and how powerful we become when we reclaim it. I don't share these stories to make anyone feel exposed. I only share them because they show what awareness and self-regulation can do. You cannot change the past, but you can always change what your mind practices now and how this plays out into your future. The networks with their chemistry will follow. The moment you see where your attention has been living, you can bring it home again. So as we close this chapter, remember this. Connection isn't about who listens to you most. It's about where your meaning belongs. Awareness and self-regulation don't punish, they restore. And when meaning returns to the right place, loyalty feels natural again. Next, we'll bring everything together, how the mind, brain, and body rebuild trust once loyalty is realigned, and how awareness becomes the foundation for lasting love. When I think about everything we've explored in this episode, one theme keeps standing out to me. Loyalty isn't about rules, it is about meaning. The mind is always assigning significance and the brain is always obeying. That's what makes awareness and self-regulation so incredibly powerful. It turns something that feels emotional into something that can actually direct. We have seen how emotional affairs don't begin with betrayal, they begin with attention. A text, a laugh, a moment of being seen. Those small sparks of meaning that the mind starts labeling as safe, exciting, or necessary. The brain doesn't know the difference between emotional and physical connection. It just knows the structure and chemistry of repetition. It follows the story the mind keeps telling. But we have also seen how awareness and self-regulation can rewrite that story. How one pause, one honest reflection, one moment of gathering awareness can shift the entire psycho-neurobiological pattern. Meaning moves the networks and chemistry, and networks and chemistry move perceptions and behavior. That is why loyalty is never lost in one moment. It's taught step by step through where we choose to place attention. I often say that love isn't an emotion we fall into, it is a practice we participate in. Every time you choose to be present, to listen fully, to express gratitude, you are strengthening the same networks that build trust. Every time you pause before reacting, you are strengthening emotional regulation. Every time you redirect meaning towards what matters, you are practicing emotional fidelity in real time. Emotional loyalty isn't about suppressing interest or pretending attraction doesn't exist. It is about choosing coherence. It is the alignment between your thoughts, your neural networks, and their chemistry and your action. When your inner story matches your outer behavior, your conscious mind, brain, and body relax. That's what real peace feels like, the absence of contradiction. So as we close this episode, I want to invite you to reflect for a moment. Where has your attention been living lately? Who or what has been getting the most emotional energy from your mind? And is that energy aligned with your values or with habits? You can start small. Awareness and self-regulation doesn't need to be dramatic. It can begin with simply noticing. Awareness and self-regulation doesn't fix the emotion, it gives you the leadership over it. And once you see it, you can guide it. The goal isn't perfection, it is presence. It is not about never feeling tempted or distracted. It is about knowing when meaning starts to drift and gently bringing it home again. That's how fidelity matures, not through fear, but through focus. The moment you become aware and begin self-regulation, the non-conscious mind lights up the prefrontal cortex and begins integrating emotional and rational processing. That's not just psychology, that's biology mirroring consciousness. Awareness and self-regulation literally rewire coherence. It brings the brain back under the direction of the collaborative mind. And that's what this whole conversation has been about, coherence. Not the absence of emotion, but the alignment of emotion and meaning. When your conscious and non-conscious mind and brain all work together, peace becomes structural and chemical, not circumstantial. The body begins to rest because it trusts the leadership of the mind. When the mind takes back authorship, the brain follows. Loyalty, peace, connection, they are all the result of meaning practiced consistently. So as you move forward, I want you to remember this. Every moment of awareness and self-regulation is a moment of fidelity. Every time you pause and notice where your attention goes, you are strengthening the circuits of trust within yourself and within your relationships. The brain may be loyal to neural networks and their chemistry, but neural networks and chemistry are loyal to meaning. You always have the power to redefine what that meaning is, because emotional fidelity isn't just about love. It is about integrity. It is about knowing that what your mind believes, your brain will perform and your life will reflect. And that's the real work. Not avoiding connection, but learning to connect consciously. If this conversation has helped you see loyalty through a new lens, not as a restriction, but as an awareness, then you've already started that process. You have already begun practicing mind management. Because the moment you become aware, you have changed the chemistry. So take this awareness with you. Keep noticing where your attention goes. Keep choosing coherence over confusion. Keep practicing meaning as your compass. Because the more you practice awareness and self-regulation, the more peace becomes your default. And that's where real trust begins. Not in perfection, but in presence. Now, if you want to take this deeper, if you want to learn how to manage these thought patterns in real time, join me inside the Help in a Hurry course. It's a 19-lesson journey that teaches you how to use awareness, reflection, and rechecking in every area of life. It is where I show you how to apply these same tools to stress, relationships, and emotional regulation so you can live from coherence, not reaction. Because once you understand how meaning drives chemistry, you can start redesigning it. One thought, one choice, one moment at a time.